Hello, everybody. I'm East Coast Pete. This is my show, Lest We Forget. Today we're going to talk about Frank Zappa. Born in 1940, died in 1993. He's an American multi-instrumentalist, composer, and band leader, a nonconformist, an improviser. Music was for Frank a laboratory, and he was a satirist like Kurt Vonnegut. Rock, pop, jazz, fusion, orchestral, and musique concrete were his test tubes and beakers. He produced and released 60 albums in his 30-year career. Many of these were with his band, the Mothers of Invention. He redirected feature-length films and music videos. He designed sleeve art. He taught himself how. He is considered the godfather of comedy rock. He criticized mainstream education and organized religion. He disapproved of censorship and drugs, but favored decriminalization and freedom of speech. In 1995, he was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Zappa was born in Baltimore. His mom was Neapolitan and Sicilian. His dad was an immigrant from Sicily of Greek and Arab descent. The family moved often because his dad was a chemist for the defense industry. In Maryland, they lived near a mustard gas arsenal, and homes in the area all had gas masks in case of an accident. Later in life, he would often refer to germs, germ warfare, ailments, and defense industry would appear in his lyrics. Zappa was sickly with asthma, earaches, and sinus infections as a boy. A doctor inserted a pellet of radium into his nostrils. Why? In 1952, the family moved to Monterey, California, and Frank's health improved. In high school, this is now San Diego, he was the drummer in his first band. Frank liked R&B, doo-wop, modernism, Igor Stravinsky, and dissonance, such as Edgar Varese. Frank began to collect records. His collection grew for all of his years. Mostly he liked the recording sounds of drums. He also collected classical music, became knowledgeable about pianists and symphonic music. He developed an interest in Edgar Varese, but also the Italian opera of Puccini. In 1956, the Zappa family moved again, this time to a small town near Edwards Air Force Base inside the Mojave Desert. At Antelope Valley High School, he met Don Glenn Vliet, also named Don Van Vliet, aka Captain Beefheart. They became friends and shared a commonality of R&B music. Zappa's band was called the Blackouts. Zappa's interest in guitar grew. He got his first guitar in 1957. Early influences were Johnny Guitar Watson, Howlin' Wolf, and Clarence Gatemouth Brown. Before graduation, Zappa had composed avant-garde pieces for the school orchestra. In 1959, he attended Chaffey College, but left after a semester. He left home in 1959 and moved to a small apartment in Echo Park, Los Angeles. he married Kathy Sherman and moved to nearby Ontario, California. Zappa worked as an ad copywriter. This also affected his outlook, and he kept a keen interest in visual representation to go with his interest in sound. In the early 60s, Frank wrote and produced songs for other local artists and studios. Gotta warn you, this is going to be a long show, so, you can always hit pause and get yourself a snack, maybe a drink. Zappa was earning a meager living as a musician and composer. He reformed the Blackouts with locals, a couple of new Blackouts. One of his songs, Memories of El Monte, was recorded by the Penguins, a doo-wop combo. Zappa appeared on a late-night TV show hosted by Steve Allen where he played a bicycle as a musical instrument. He also recorded some material with Captain Beefheart under the name The Suits. The song was rejected by DOT Records for having no commercial potential. Zappa's marriage didn't last. He was spending 12 hours a day in the studio experimenting with overdubbing and audio tape manipulation. Zappa had earned money from film composing, so he bought the studio, which was now Studio Z. Friends moved in. Zappa performed in local bars with a power trio, the Mothers, with a U. Zappa got a rep as a movie king of Cucamonga for his work scoring films, and the local police suspected that he was making pornographic movies. And in 1965, Zappa was approached by a Vice Squad undercover cop and accepted an offer of $100 to produce a suggestive audio tape for a stag party. Zappa and a female friend recorded a faked erotic episode. When he handed it over, he was arrested. The police stripped the studio of all recordings. The press had been alerted and sensationalized the event. Zappa was charged with conspiracy to commit pornography. He got a sentence of 6 months, which was reduced. This left a permanent mark on his anti-authority stance. He also lost most of his work and got evicted from the studio. It was time to turn the page. In 1965, Zappa joined the Soul Giants, an R&B band, as a guitarist. This began his singing career as well. He convinced the band to play his songs so that they could get a record contract. The band was now called the Mothers with an O, which is a music term. The best musicians were called motherfuckers. They became known to the LA underground music scene. They signed to Verve, a division of MGM. Verve told them to revise the name Mothers, knowing the derivation of the longer version. Thus, the Mothers became the Mothers of Invention. In 1966, Freak Out, which was a double album, Zappa was established as a radical new voice in rock. In the studio, Zappa conducted, and the musicians were expected to read from charts. That was not the standard for rock back then. Here's the songs on Freak Out. 1. Hungry Freaks Daddy. 2. I Ain't Got No Heart. 3. Who Are the Brain Police? 4. Go Cry on Somebody Else's Shoulder. 5. Motherly Love. 6. How Could I Be Such a Fool? 7. Wowie Zowie. 8. You Didn't Try to Call Me. 9. Any Way the Wind Blows. 10. I'm Not Satisfied. 11. You're Probably Wondering Why I'm Here. 12. Trouble Every Day. 13. Help, I'm a Rock. 14. The Return of the Son of Monster Magnet. The last track was released unfinished because Verve didn't want to pay for any more studio time. Frank was pissed. Zappa moved to Laurel Canyon with Pan Zarubica, who appeared on Freak Out. Freak Out has an exclamation point in case you didn't know that. LA musicians considered his place to be party central. Zappa didn't do drugs, and if you were in his band, neither did you. Somehow, with all of this, the album was a success. He met and fell for Gail Sloatman, and they married in 1967, had 4 children, and stayed together until Zappa's death. But that ain't a long time and the amount of years away yet still. Because we're just on the second album, people. Second album's name is Absolutely Free. In 1967, Zappa was in control of everything. That was how he worked. He said, we're satirists. We satire everything, including the 60s counterculture. But The Mothers was not his only project. As Lumpy Gravy, he released an orchestral piece which was seen as a monument to John Cage, the foremost atonal composer who used found objects as instruments and invented new scales for half and quarter tones that Zappa enjoyed. The Mothers played a gig in New York City at the Garrick Theater above the Cafe A Go-Go. The gig was extended and went on for 6 months. I don't think he played continually for 6 months. Kind of sounded like it did from the way I presented that. He probably played every night, though. Guest performers and audience participation were encouraged. The album, We're Only In It for the Money, was released after a tour of Europe. The Beatles' Tomorrow Never Knows was sampled along with California surf music, and the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper album was parodied on the inside sleeve. You should check that out, it's pretty funny. The studio work was considered the most creative audio editing and production yet heard in pop music. Nice going, Frank. The follow-up, Cruisin' with Reuben and the Jets, was completely different from previous records. It was a collection of doo-wop songs. Fans didn't know if it was a satire or a tribute. Zappa said about it, it was conceived in the way Stravinsky's compositions were in his neoclassical period. If he could take the forms and cliches of classical era and pervert them, why not do the same to doo-wop in the 50s? A theme from The Rite of Spring is heard on one of the songs. Rite of Spring, that's a Stravinsky tune. It's a 12-tone song. It's pretty out there. Zappa began 2 labels, Bizarre Records and Straight Records, with distribution by Warner. Zappa produced Trout Mask Replica for Captain Beefheart, a great and amazing record. And he also released Alice Cooper and Lenny Bruce's last live performance. I don't think it was Alice Cooper's last live performance. He named himself Alice Cooper and he's still around, so it must be Lenny Bruce's last live performance. That makes more sense, right, Alice? You ever hear Alice's radio show? Everybody's heard it. What am I asking? You know. Zappa appeared twice with the Monkees on the pop sitcom Zappa, dressed as Mike Nesmith. Interviews Mike Nesmith, who is dressed as Frank Zappa. He later performed a cameo in the Monkees movie Head. Zappa liked the Monkees, even offered Mickey Dolenz a position in the Mothers, but RCA would not let Dolenz out of his contract. Right, not, N-O-T, not. Zappa and the Mothers moved back to L.A. to Laurel Canyon again, and this is where he stayed from then on. The Mothers broke up in '69 due to the financial strain of the 9-member group. Zappa also left MGM and signed with Warner Reprise. Remaining recordings of the Mothers were released as 2 albums, Weasels Ripped My Flesh and Burnt Weenie Sandwich, both in 1970. Hot Rats was a solo album. It features, for the first time on record, Zappa playing extended guitar solos. Peaches and Regalia became an enduring piece of work. Well-known studio musicians played the other parts, and Captain Beefheart contributed vocals on Willie the Pimp. The album became popular in England and had a major influence on jazz rock fusion. 200 Motels is a 1971 American/Brit musical surrealist film starring the Mothers of Invention and Ringo Starr. It's about being on tour, sometimes taken from real events, but mostly trippy comedic fiction. Zappa played himself. Ringo played Larry the Dwarf, dressed as Frank Zappa. Keith Moon was the Hot Nun. Howard Kalin and Mark Volman, the Flo and Eddie, played themselves. Jimmy Carl Black as Lonesome Cowboy Burt. Ansley Dunbar as himself. Pam DeBars as the interviewer. You may know Pam DeBars from her infamous time with the Doors. The London Philharmonic Orchestra as the Bewildered Orchestra. I mean, that's what they played. They were bewildered. I don't think they had to act very much. And The Mothers of Invention. The movie was a critical success. I didn't like it. The colors of the scenery were all fucked up, and the former turtles were not particularly funny, I thought. I missed the days of happy together, the turtles. I missed those days. The Mothers from 200 Motels stayed together for Chunga's Revenge and the 200 Motels soundtrack, and then a tour and 2 live albums. In '71, Zappa suffered 2 setbacks in Switzerland. The Mothers' equipment was destroyed when some stupid with a flare gun burned the place to the ground. Deep Purple's Smoke on the Water was a real event. Not long after, Zappa was attacked by a fan at a show in London. who pushed him off the stage onto a concrete floor. The band thought he had been killed, but he was only severely injured. Fans in England, Sex Pistols, what have you. It took 6 months in a wheelchair before Frank was ready to continue. Flo and Eddie and the band took tours to try to keep solvent. I saw one of the shows in Providence, Rhode Island. It was alright. I liked it. I was hoping Frank would show up. Wheelchair or no. Then in 1972, Frank Zappa released 2 jazz albums, Waka Jawaka and The Grand Wazoo. At the end of 72, Zappa began touring with a 20-piece orchestra called The Grand Wazoo. In 1974, Apostrophe reached number 10 in the U.S., his highest chart so far. Don't Eat the Yellow Snow as a single also charted. At the end of the decade, Shake Your Booty became the best-selling album of his career. Zappa's last tour with his band was in 1988. In 1990, he was diagnosed with terminal prostate cancer. He passed in 1993, 17 days before his 53rd birthday. His grave is unmarked. The Zappa Family Trust has released 40 more posthumous albums. That makes the total over 100 albums. That is James Brown territory. At the very least, I must mention Zappa's anti-censorship. In 1985, he testified before the U.S. Senate attacking the PMRC, which means Parents Music Resource Center, which consisted of many wives of politicians, such as Tipper Gore, wife of Al Gore, who began the global warming scare. Did I say global warming? Sorry, I meant global warming scare, with his feature film, An Inconvenient Truth, where he predicts that the world's coastal cities will be underwater by 2020. Oh my God! This was a political step toward globalism and one world government and Agenda 21, which advocates genocide, and no cities will be underwater, at least in this century, except maybe Venice. I think they like water in Venice because they got the boats going down the canals. Sole mio. Anyhow, that's my show on Frank Zappa. Hope it recorded okay. I know it's in black and white, but I think I'm probably not in black and white, but Frank is. Should probably be reversed, and I should be in black and white, and Frank should be in color. But he's not going to complain. Thanks, everybody. Please join me again on Lest We Forget. Everybody take good care.